About how the most revelatory, out of all her revelations, the greatest joy of her spiritual experience was when she got to crawl on her hands and knees before this picture. Because it was the first time she really got to move and be mobile in a way that she herself could do so. And then that's how she knew that she was on the right path to something. So, what happened was, Teresa was a part of, at the same time, Teresa was a part of an order called the Carmelites. And Teresa belonged to a very large convent of about 180 nuns, and they lived a very relaxed rule. They took the Carmelite rule and really watered it down. They entertained guests. They had state officials stay over. They had, dinners for people, and it was just a real, fancy kind of, convent. And Teresa saw this as a conflict of interest. One of the reasons why she liked the Carmelites or went to that particular monastery was because of the origins of the Carmelites. The Carmelites were a group of European contemplatives that they established a community in a wadi, which is basically a dried out basin off of Mount Carmel. Which Mount Carmel is off the ridge of the Haifa in Israel, and in the early 1200s. And they only lasted about a century there because there was a lot of conflict between Christians and Muslims in that area. So eventually they moved back to Europe and kind of dispersed into other communities until they could re-solidify. But when they re-solidified, they kind of lost their contemplative origins and started to become street preachers and helping out those in the cities and things like that. And Teresa was convinced, though, and she was concerned that the order, I don't think she was concerned that they did social activism. She was concerned that they lost the actual root of the Carmelite order, which was the contemplative life, the solitary life. I didn't join this order to entertain this princess. I joined this order so I could sit in a room and talk to God and let me alone. Okay, so, and she was willing to develop reform of her own spiritual development. And a lot of that was because she had those revelations and those visions. So, naively, she's going, Father, I had a thought. Which, that damned her, right off the bat, what a dangerous thing. And she was like, I'd like to reform this order, and part of my inspiration is because I had an angel drive a spear into me and my entrails started to fall out, or to that effect, basically. I had this realization that this is the path that we need to go on. And that guy was like, wait, what? And so she, we repeat herself, and he's like, hold on, let me talk to somebody about this, because, the seal of confession, it was obviously tight back then. And so let me talk to somebody else about this. And he talks to somebody else, and they talk to somebody else. They're like, well, I know a guy in the Inquisition, let me talk to that guy and see if this is legit. Okay? So while this is going on, there's already talks and rumors in the larger ecclesiastic society, and then because she's a part of this fancy convent, where all these state people come through, they gossip. Oh, well, we do have this weird nun. She's weird. Okay, she was real sick for a while, and now she's all whatever. So, and so there was talk about Teresa, and it was rumored at this point before any literature of her came out at all. So this is kind of the basis of where we're going to this next book. So one of the priests that she talked to, after talking to so many different people, she went through a bunch of different confessors, and many of them were convinced, that this was all from the devil, and you receiving these visions and these wisdom, from the devil. And she finally found a Jesuit who was like, no, it sounds pretty legit, it sounds like you're actually experiencing something. And so he made her do a bunch of things. First, he made her write down like all these defenses. He's like, I'm hearing a lot of stuff about you though, so I need you to write down your defenses for them. Like, why are you saying these things? What is your legitimate reasonings behind them, and are they theologically correct? So she did a lot of that. She did a lot of that, but he finally got her to be able to establish her first convent, and he said, at the same time, I want you to write your autobiography. I'm hearing little bits here, I'm hearing little bits here, I'm hearing this rumor here and that here. I want you to write down for me what you went through and just lay it out. And that was her first real book. You know, there's lots of letters and literature and even small guides that she wrote probably before that, but this was her first real book. And somehow, a copy of the book ended up in the hands of the Princess of Avila, and I never got the experience to look up her name because once I read about her, I didn't care. So she was no Diana. Okay, so. And, but she, this princess, she kind of had like this, she was kind of like a New Age bored housewife. Like, she had to have all the crystals. You know what I mean? So she had to have all the Jesus-y stuff because she could afford it, and that's how you get to heaven, right? You buy all the stuff. Collect them all. And so she was definitely somebody who, like, she tried to buy relics and icons and stuff, and she got a copy of this autobiography, and at first enamored with it, you know, just kind of like a fan, like, oh, you know, you're Sylvia Brown, let me give you some money. This princess as well was like, oh, you're Teresa of Avila, let me fund the building of this new convent for you. And so, you know, Teresa's like, okay. But then the nun thought she could take some liberties with it because it's her building. So she's like, I want you to put this nun into your order. And Teresa was like, no. Like, no, it's just not going to work. And so the princess was like, well, I'm going to talk to all these people about how crazy you are. And so she started perpetuating this, you know, Teresa has all these delusions and visions and stuff, which, being a woman, they must be from Satan. If they were coming from a man, it would probably be from God. But the fact they were coming to Teresa, it's probably from Satan. Just like Eve, you know, so that kind of theory. So when the princess became a widow, it was, you know, traditional back then, like, well, I'm not, and when I say princess, don't get me wrong, she's not 22. Okay, this is just a title to an old lady. Okay, so, and when she became a widow, she demanded entry into the convent that she funded. She's like, because that was the thing, I'm not going to get remarried. My children have received the lordship that my husband had, you know, so really I'm just here in title and whatever. So what widows do at this time is they become nuns, so that way they can make sure they go to heaven so they can see their husbands again. Okay? And but within the first week, like, there were so many complaints about her. She was violent. She entertained visitors in her private cloisters. Tramp. Okay, she forced other nuns to only speak to her when they were on their knees. So the other nuns wrote to Teresa, and Teresa, you know, wrote back to intervene, saying, you know, this is how our order goes, this is what we do, and she wrote back to Teresa and said, I can do what I want because it's my building. And then Teresa wrote back and said, well, the building may be yours, but the nuns aren't. And Teresa had told all the nuns, pack your stuff and get out. And left the princess into this convent all by herself. Little passive aggressive, yes, on, you know, on Teresa's part, but nobody said that, you know, you have to be a good conflict resolutionist to be a saint, you know. So, in retaliation, the princess says, well, I have a copy of your book, and I'm going to give it to the higher-ups of the Inquisition. So finally, the Inquisition not only have the rumors and some of the defenses, but they have something written by her that says, I had these thoughts, okay? And they weren't just womanly thoughts, they were deep, you know, so, and they said things that aren't necessarily taught on a regular basis in the church. I think at this point, though, Teresa's getting a little PO'd. She's getting a little angry. She's tired of defending herself. She's been because despite whatever anybody said about her, she was a great nun. She was very devoted to her spirituality. She was very devoted to this process and to this life. And if anything, the more devoted and the deeper she got into it, the more retaliation and the more attack from the outside she received. And I think at this point she's just starting to get really angry at the authorities that are in the way of her and the bridegroom. Because that was her experience. Like, everything that's happening right now is just her trying to get to the bridegroom, and all these things are just in the way. Just, so you don't come between somebody and their man. It just don't happen. It's just going to cut you. So, and that's what she started to do. The reason why I say that, too, is because at the same time that the Spanish Inquisition received this autobiography, they said, okay, this is weird. We are officially banning all spiritual books in the vernacular. Okay? So we can't disseminate these books. They wanted to put a stop not only to this autobiography, but to some other things as well. But that was the point of it. And right when they said that, Teresa wrote another book called The Way of Perfection as a vernacular spiritual guide to her fellow nuns. So, and it kind of happened around the same time. It was almost like perfect timing. It was like, did she do it and it was bad timing? Like it was almost like, oh, I'm good. Or was she literally like, yeah, sign of peace with one finger. Okay, so I do what I want. Okay, and The Way of Perfection has a much more specific tone to mental prayer and contemplative life and contemplative prayer, and she starts to get into the more diagrammic aspects of that. She starts to outline it. So she's just kind of digging herself a bigger hole. Okay? But after that happened, I think Teresa finally, it hit her, you're going to lose your head. You know what I mean? Like, you either have to, like, what you have, and there were people surrounding her that knew, that were like, what you're saying is legit, but you just got to say it in a way that your audience is going to hear it, without them, crucifying you for it. So Teresa took a number of measures in her third and most famous work, The Interior Castle, in order to ensure that there would be no issues at all. And this is what I call protecting the interior castle. First of all, the interior castle, she starts referring to herself in an anonymous third person. So there are things in the autobiography where she's like, I received this vision, and then in this book she says, I know somebody who received this vision. And this is what happened to them, and this is what the priest told them to do, and and this is why this is right or this is wrong. So she totally took herself out of it because she and I think a big part of that was that she did not want to make it look like it was about her. Like, I received these visions. So no, it wasn't about her, it was about the vision. Okay? She also, consistently confessing to an inherent lack of intelligence. I don't know anything, I never went to school, even though, she could read and she could create convents, like as if they were made of Legos, like she's just passing them out as she goes. Excellent businesswoman, excellent accountant, excellent writer, she's not an unintelligent woman, but all throughout the book. I don't know anything, you're so much more smarter because you're a man, I wish a man wrote this, but at last. She uses a lot of metaphors and similes. She completely kind of pulls out any liturgical or theological or ecclesiastic terminology. The kingdom of heaven is like a hill or a dove or a cloud or a bird or a flower, It's not, the pneumatology of this, kind of thing. She did not want to be that specific where anybody could say, but no. There's, on my way to work, I pass this house every day that has this huge sign. They change it like every 2 to 3 days, and it's always some evangelical. It's not evangelical because they're Catholic, but it's something very pro-conservative, and they put like pictures of aborted babies up, and like very gross and whatever. And they, around Christmas time, they put something up that was like, you know, Christ without Christmas, you know, never existed or something. And after years of seeing their like theological like predications for, you know, whatever their social reasonings were, I was like, no, that is theologically wrong. I caught you. Finally, after all these years, I've caught you. And I think so, and I really wanted to write them a letter saying, no, you're technically considered heretics, and here's why. And but never did, because I just didn't want to take it that far. But Teresa wanted to avoid that, so she just used all these melodies. God is a mountain. God is a dove. God is a flower. She explains her process constantly. This is how I came to this. I didn't just think of it. I was praying, and then I was praying some more, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did that. So she makes sure that she just doesn't, she makes sure she explains that she didn't just come up with things out of the air. There was a process to make that happen. She uses a lot of scripture to support her claims, and as we talked earlier, that's not necessarily a good argument for anything, because scripture contradicts itself. But when you are in that 1500s Catholicism, scripture does not contradict itself, no matter what, if it really does or not. So she uses a lot of scripture as like the bona fide, well, it's true because Matthew says this, you know. So she makes a lot of noise about depending on intelligent man. I could never have gotten here if it wasn't for Father so-and-so, and if it wasn't for Monsignor so-and-so and the Bishop of Toledo, I would have never been able to experience all this wonderfulness. You know, thank God for the man. Okay, so she makes a lot of noise about that. And again, she's a Spanish female mystic. The exact same group of people that the Inquisition's really going after right now. You know, she didn't intend to be, and that was the difference between her and the other mystics. The other mystics wanted to be that. God chose Teresa, at least in her viewpoint, to be that. And that was the crux that she was at. And lastly, she definitely makes an insistence that all progress, whether in the church or in the spiritual life, is by God's grace. So none of this was because of her. She did not do anything to have these visions. It wasn't because she was worthy of having these visions. She's constantly talking about how much of a sinner she is and those kind of things. All of this was because God is a wonderful God and gives us things that we don't deserve. Okay? So these are her defenses. This is her protecting this third book. Okay? And so when you're reading this book, because this is my sales pitch for the book, I encourage you to read the book, and then right after this we're going to talk about what that imagery and that ascent is for her. But there's nothing, again, like I said, I could have done this 1-hour presentation at church, or in the parish, but I knew that I'd do the 1-hour presentation and everybody would be like, that's great, thanks. And then they'd walk away and never do anything with it again. So I do encourage you to like pick up the interior castle. I do encourage you to read it and to experience, because it's very simple. It's not deep theology. There's no magic chalk circles on the floor. There's no like esotericism. There's no well, there's esotericism, but not in the sense of that ceremonial magic esotericism. It's a very simple, grassroots kind of mysticism, and I encourage it for lay people and those kind of things. However, you have to get through the rhetoric of her protecting that interior castle in order to really get to that meat. So, here's the basics of the interior castle. St. Teresa says that the interior castle, it can be imagined like a diamond-shaped castle with many rooms. And the center of that room contains the king. Okay? I imagine it like a disco ball. Okay? And that disco ball has sheaths or layers, and you have to pass through. And the only reason it's a disco ball is because it's diamond-like. But it has, it passes through those sheaths and layers. And in the center of that ball is what she calls the king, which is God. Okay? The course of the soul's journey is from the periphery of life, which is the outside of the ball, and you pass through 7 sheaths to get to the center. There's a big difference about Teresa's imagery and a lot of the other imagery. A lot of the other imagery of the spiritual process is, there's the journeyman going up the mountain, and I'm at the bottom of the mountain and God is at the top, and I have to go to him. Or I'm on one shore and God's on the other shore, and I have to cross through the river to get there. But Teresa's imagery and Teresa's model is God is always there. God is always there. It doesn't matter if you're at the bottom of the mountain or at the top. It's just a matter of experience God on different levels. Okay, so she doesn't have this concept that there's anybody that's outside of this God reality. And this really reminds me of one of my favorite prayers is from St. Augustine. And in that prayer he says, "You were within me and I was without." So the king was within and I was on the periphery. But the king was within and I was without. So why don't we just go to the center? Why don't we just let's just go to the center, okay? Well, St. Teresa explains this. She says, first of all, she says, because we have a lack of self-knowledge. She doesn't say we have a lack of gnosis, but what she means is we have a lack of gnosis, okay? But what she literally says, she literally uses, I can't say literally because she wrote it in Spanish, but it's literally translated as self-knowledge. And the reason why we don't go to the center is because we don't know ourselves. And we don't know that living on the periphery is still living with God. We don't know, and we don't know that by going inward we can go deeper. And we don't know those connections. She also says that the periphery that contains the main center in itself contains multiple centers. And we grasp on to those centers. And she says the reason why we grasp onto the centers is because we don't know ourselves. And those centers tell us lies that we accept about ourselves. They may not even be bad things. I'm a priest. Okay? Essentially, in time and space and all those things, and maybe you'll argue with me on some metaphysical level about this, but, that's a false center telling me who I am. But the center of who I am, before I became ordained, or if I do something that, maybe I get defrocked or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that, just because I'm a priest doesn't mean I'm closer to God, and doesn't mean, if I'm not a priest doesn't mean I'm further. But it falsely identifies me that way. I work in a school district, that's not really who I am. It's what I do, and it's what I do in this world. But it's not my relationship with the king. And so Teresa says there's all these things on the outside, and some of them are really bad. Some like the wealth, lust, food, and
beauty.
What was it?
Beauty.
Beauty. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same things on that side. It's like these are the things that people cling to. But Teresa says the reason why we cling to them is because they give you a false sense of validation, they give you a false sense of worth, and a false sense of identification. She even said that her being a nun was one of these centers because she had all this work to do, and she's like, I'm starting convents and I got paperwork, and that nun stubbed her toe and she's the whiniest one of them all, and and I have to deal with all this stuff, and it distracts her from her conversation with the bride. It's like, why can mom and dad have 10 minutes in the bedroom by themselves? Can you please just make some cereal and watch some cartoons and let us alone? And that, because that's all really Teresa wants to do, is she wants to go into the center and be with her king, but there's all these other things outside that are, Mom, I'm hungry, whatever. And so all these, and she's like, who I really am, I know who I really am is when I'm with this person, and all these other things are telling me, no, who you really are is the caretaker of me, or the administrator of papers, or the builder of convents, and those kind of things. And we all do the same thing as well. She states pretty clearly that these temporal and created centers, and I worded it this way, for temporal and created centers end up becoming idols in place of the eternal and uncreated center. So we end up worshiping these other things, and the only reason we worship them is because we identify with them so well. And she doesn't say this, but she I think she implies that with religion in general, in church. You know, as she's more involved in the politics of the church, and I understand this, and I'm not saying this personally, but being involved in many church politics from many different churches, it turns you off from being in a church sometimes, you know, and so she had that same issue where she was just like, sometimes the church is this idol for me that keeps me away from spending time with the bridegroom. And it becomes this thing that demands my worship. And in exchange, it tells me, well, you're a good nun, Teresa, but she doesn't want to be a good nun. She wants to be a good spiritual wife in that manner. So, and St. John of the Cross, who was her contemporary, and he helped her build mail orders to her reform, also stated that the periphery